Something you may not have noticed at the WEF in Davos last week is that Tony Blair, from the Iraq War, was advocating for more digital infrastructure. More digital infrastructure, Tony. Is your legacy not bad enough already? Hello there, you 6 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom. Like you, I want to be free as an individual. I don't want to be told what to do. I want to make up my own mind to live a moral, ethical, spiritual life, not hurting others, being valuable and of use wherever possible, and not having my energy and time on this earth turned into an inutile little blob of battery that the centralized system can suck up, monitoring my every action and transaction, guiding them when necessary. That's where me and Tony Blair, my fellow countrymen, differ. Tony Blair was at Davos last week advocating once more for digital infrastructure. What he means by that is everyone should have some sort of passport and we should be able to monitor your transactions so we can introduce social credit scores, so we can shut down people's bank accounts, already happening in Canada, you know about that, so we can deny you access to services. That's what I think Tony Blair might be up to. Let me know what you think Tony Blair's up to in the comments and chat. Let's see what Tony Blair, Klaus Schwab, the WEF and digital IDs are really about. Former United Kingdom Prime Minister Tony Blair has called for global organisations such as the World Trade Organization and the World Economic Forum, neither of those things are elected, look who funds them, to push national governments to introduce digital infrastructure that monitors who has been vaccinated and who hasn't. When the rest of the world is dealing with putting together new data and understanding new narratives and how this story has shifted over time, Tony Blair is still desperately trying to push for the most early hysterical, well, everyone should have a digital ID. We should know what people are doing at all times. Maybe if we all had digital IDs, we could find those weapons of mass destruction.
This issue to do with the technology and the digital infrastructure, I just want to emphasize how important I think that is. You need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of the vaccines that will come on down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots.
Oh, that's good. Nice to know. Let the shareholders in on that in advance. That's not where we are on the pandemic conversation right now. It appears, let me know what you think in the comments and chat, that as more data becomes available, that it seems that the entire approach to the pandemic could have been different around lockdowns, masks, medications. It should have been more particular, more bespoke, less hysterical, and may I argue, this is my opinion, less profit driven. Tony Blair is advocating for a return to the early hysterical globalist agenda. Everyone get in your houses, everyone get vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, you're a pariah. I don't like to lean into conspiracy theories, but when I see a former prime minister who advocated for an unnecessary war standing on a global stage funded by taxpayers and billionaires saying that everyone should carry a digital ID, I start to think there might be an agenda at play. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think in the chat.
So you've got to have, for reasons to do with the healthcare more generally, but certainly for a pandemic or for vaccines, you've got to have a proper digital infrastructure, and many countries don't have that. In fact, most countries don't have that.
Yeah, because people don't want it. Also, where are we progressing to? According to whose agenda? Whose objective is it that we're pursuing? Whose vision? Tony Blair speaks as if there's a shared vision that all of us have. Meanwhile, they talk about diversity and respecting different cultures and different sexualities and different identities, which, by the way, I'm totally down with. But that means respecting the individual freedom of everybody. Some people believe there was already an agenda to introduce digital ID before the pandemic. Tony Blair was speaking about digital ID before the pandemic. Now there has been a pandemic. We have to ask ourselves, was it incredible foresight or was it an agenda? Also, it seems now that advocating for a digital ID on the basis of vaccination is a flawed argument, because knowing whether or not someone is vaccinated in order to do what? Let them into a venue? Let them out of a country? What's the argument? What's the science behind that? Other than it's profitable for pharmaceutical companies to have as many people vaccinated as possible, and it's beneficial to centralized authority to have as many people as possible carrying digital IDs. What's the argument beyond that? Now we've got your digital ID and we can see that you've had this medication. We're able to what? It's power for power's sake. And you know how power ultimately behaves. It becomes like a sort of a self-perpetuating ideology. And if you need an example of what that looks like, look at Tony Blair. What's this dude still doing? Sit down, mate. Have a rest.
So again, you've got to say, okay, who are the people that can make this happen? How do you get the right partnerships in place?
Who are the people? Who are the partnerships? Will it be big tech? Will it be big pharma? Will it be governments with friendly figures who have attended WEF conferences? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it will be.
You've got to work out what is it that you want to achieve in order to make sure that any future pandemic is properly handled And what are the partnerships that you're going to create in order to ensure that the answers you get are the right answers?
Can you imagine what an anodyne and sanitized version of a broadcast conspiracy theory might look like? What you need in the event of a future pandemic is to have the right partners and the right outcomes. That sounds like the management of information, powerful alliances being formed, undemocratic processes. That's not how politicians should be talking anymore, with the ability to communicate that we all have. What you don't want is human beings that are actually no better than you. They have the same flaws you have the same compulsions, impulses that you have, coming together to decide that everyone else is different than you. They should carry digital IDs. There might be another pandemic one day which will be super profitable if it's anything like the last one, and we should get them all banged up and jabbed up at our earliest convenience. I don't give that authority to anybody, and neither should you.
And then you're going to have the mechanisms of implementation.
I also don't like that those mechanisms look like me in the palm of Tony Blair's hand being karate chopped like Saddam Hussein's neck.
And those mechanisms will be partly through the formal institutions that you have, like the WTO, but they'll also be through organizations like yours, which I think, have many advantages because they don't get landed with the same bureaucracy and, frankly, small p politics around them.
Bureaucracy and democracy, and whether or not people approve of it, and whether or not it's the will of the people, and whether or not there were weapons of mass destruction, and sexying up the dossier, and a million dead children. Yeah, it can be such a slow, exhausting, oh no, I can't bomb these children whenever I want. Oh, I can't get everyone to carry a digital ID. We should resist at all costs the advances of these centralized authoritarians, dressing it up as convenience and safety, as they always do. If the solution to the problems of the world are always, why don't we centralize authority, bypass democracy, place the decisions in the hands of big tech and big pharma? It's a bit weird, isn't it? It's a bit weird that they didn't want to get rid of patents. It's a bit weird that they repressed information about natural immunity, censoring activists calling for generic vaccines to be available. It seems like all of the solutions create opportunity for profit and centralized power, and all of the problems detract from those opportunities and create more individual freedom, need for democracy, need for conversation. These are the things that I advocate for most. These are the things that I oppose most vehemently. Don't matter if you're left or right or any of those, in my view, outmoded, outdated, defunct terms. We know our brain sends messages all over our bodies. Of course we do. It's in constant communication. But did you know that the gut is speaking back to your brain? Not like that. Grow up. The more we learn about how the gut is connected to everything else, the more we understand how much a good probiotic can impact every process in your body. After 2 years in development, Heights have launched the world's first probiotic to support gut, brain, and immune health in one daily capsule, the Smart Probiotic, a product that targets gut health and your mental health and immunity in one. And God knows you need good natural immunity these days. Right, kids? It helped my digestion, improved my mood in a miserable rainy January in the Northern Hemisphere, so that I can continue to create the content that you love and adore and become a conduit for the truth and freedom that we need if we're to change the world together. Oh my God, it's the last one. Only one. I better get some more of these. One capsule a day, anytime. Go to yourheights.com or check out the link in the show notes and use code BRAND15 at checkout to get your exclusive discount and start taking care of your lovely little brain and your gorgeous body. Awaken yourself today.
That's what we need to do. But if you want the politicians to focus on a plan, I promise you it's got to be because they think in the next few years, not in the broad future, it's going to matter to them to have that plan.
So there you go, Tony Blair saying create hysteria and panic around another potential pandemic so people do exactly what they're told, create more centralized authority, compile more data and the ability to control people. What if that information should fall into the wrong hands? Tony Blair's a person who believes in his own righteousness. He believed vehemently, weapons of mass destruction, let's go bomb Iraq. If we'd have been able to have an argument along the lines of there are no weapons of mass destruction and the destabilization of Iraq may cause problems for years to come, up to and including the creation of ISIS, perhaps it would have been a very different conversation that would have been had. So for me, Tony Blair don't get a seat at this conversation unless it's a seat that's paid for by the WEF, where I imagine his foundation makes donations. Haven't done that research yet, but I'm pretty confident.
It's also about showing people and showing the political leadership
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've become too cynical and jaded. Let's get a wide shot so we can see who else is at the conversation to make sure that all this talk about vaccines definitely playing a part in the future, vaccines potentially being mandated and enforced through digital IDs, and a digital ID infrastructure that encompasses the entire globe is only, as Tony Blair himself says, for humanitarian and health reasons. Cut to the wide.
That you can make a positive difference to your healthcare system by adopting these measures.
Wait, is that Albert Bourla, CEO of Pfizer? Oh, Tony. Blair's call is the latest of several that he and his non-profit, yeah right, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, have made for an expansion of mandatory digital surveillance infrastructure. What word in there is most offensive? Mandatory digital surveillance infrastructure. It's a very offensive set of words there. So how do we get to this position where this is an accepted part of the conversation and ongoing advocacy for the idea is continuing to infiltrate our news media, when a few years ago the idea of us all being forced to carry digital passports would have been dismissed as a conspiracy? Since their inception, COVID surveillance apps have been positioned by authorities as a tool for keeping their citizens safe during the pandemic. However, governments have been using these digital tools to scoop up a wide range of data on their citizens and combine this with the vast troves of data they already hold. In many instances, this data is also shared with private companies. For example, the UK's vaccine passport app was provided by the National Health Service, which already holds citizens' medical records and sensitive data. To use the app, citizens have to provide their date of birth, phone number, postcode, and a photo of a government-issued ID document. They're also prompted to scan their face as part of an optional, for now, verification process. Not only does this process let the UK government harvest more data, but the facial verification data is also shared with the private company iProve as part of a contract which the NHS has yet to publish details of for security reasons. Wow, so that's another way that the formerly care-oriented NHS is being used to accumulate data and gain profit. In Australia, quarantine was being policed by an app that collects facial recognition and geolocation data and sends this to servers that are controlled by the government of South Australia. Australian police have also used COVID tracing data in criminal investigations, despite promising that they never would. But I'm sure that it will never ever happen again. Although governments are collecting this data through multiple apps and for the most part haven't officially incorporated it into an official unified digital ID system, all of the data resides on government-controlled servers and is being used as an unofficial digital ID that allows the governments to identify and surveil their citizens. So at the moment, you can bet that in a situation where they thought it was warranted, they would use it. You remember the Five Eyes scandal that emerged from all of the Snowden files and the NSA revelations that Australia, America, UK, Anglophonic countries were collaborating, providing each other with information. For them, having a centralized database with everyone's information on it is just an advantage. There's no downside to that for them. It's profitable. It gives them more ability to control. For us, there might be some conveniences, like you might be able to get in somewhere more quickly. But where are you going? Where are you rushing to? Some perfect white cell of total imprisonment. Pre-COVID, citizens were highly resistant to the idea of digital IDs because of their potential to restrict freedom, erode privacy, and place more power in the hands of big government and big tech. But during the pandemic, governments have broken this resistance by forcing their citizens to use COVID surveillance apps in order to access public transport, restaurants, and many other services they could freely access before COVID. Essentially, we've been coached into accepting ideas that previously would have been unacceptable. Stay in your house. Oh, well, I'll do that. God, I don't want to kill an old lady. Get in your house. Do you want to go to a pop concert? Gonna need digital ID. We've been coached into accepting ideas that just a little while ago would have been completely unacceptable to us. Contract tracing and vaccine passport checking points became pervasive in many countries, along with signs that reminded people to use the COVID surveillance apps and employees that enforced this COVID surveillance to comply with government mandates. As a result of this COVID surveillance push, the process of checking in and displaying a de facto digital ID to participate in society was normalised within less than 2 years. The process became so normalised that Apple, which has more than 1 billion active iPhone users, partnered with the US Transport Security Administration, TSA, to digitalise driver's licenses and state IDs in several states. That's unprecedented power. That's a private big tech company with access to information and resources on a scale that the magnates of the steel and energy era could only have dreamed of, partnering with big state now with new regulatory capacities, with a population that's getting used to being told what to do. While Apple insists these digital IDs are private and that Apple and the issuing states do not know when or where users present their IDs, it admits that this digitization is part of its vision of replacing the physical wallet with a secure and easy to use mobile wallet. This push to replace physical ID with digital ID from one of the world's most powerful big tech companies will boost the trend that has been set in motion by COVID and accelerate the public's acceptance of having to display a digital ID to participate in society. society. I suppose what that shows you is that there need to be political voices that are talking about demonopolization and breaking up big tech companies, which at the moment are coming from extraordinarily the right, I suppose because the big tech industry, broadly speaking, allies with the liberal establishment. But what we are interested in is true individual and community freedom, not just a different set of centralized interests taking over from this set. We want you to be in a position of power. And when you learn that these big tech companies got into that position, not because of some genius, but because of government subsidies and because of sharing of information, it doesn't seem so much like a good old shucks American success story, more like an agenda to centralize information and power that can be enacted and exacted at any point. The data grabs and COVID tracking tools that have been implemented amid the pandemic have bolstered government's surveillance apparatus and allowed them to monitor citizens at a scale that's never been seen before, while also normalizing the idea that basic freedoms are now contingent on showing a digital ID. However, most of this COVID surveillance apparatus is currently split across multiple apps and databases and has yet to be tied together under a single digital ID. But powerful governments and international organizations are openly pushing for expanded digital IDs that connect all this data and more under a unified digital ID. And there is Tony Blair doing that work. That is what Tony Blair is literally advocating for. I don't know whether he knows he's doing that. I'm assuming he does because of the type of relationships, the type of history that he has. These kind of voices are very dangerous voices. We've already seen in the last couple of years that mistakes were made. Let's just assume they're legitimate errors. We thought the virus died here, but it looks more likely it started there. We thought the vaccines were this effective. It turns out they're more likely to be this effective. We thought natural immunity wasn't effective at all. Turns out that it is. We said that we would never freeze people's bank accounts just because they did something we didn't agree with. Turns out that we will do that. You don't even need to believe that the people currently in power are evil. Although if you do, I would understand that belief. You just have to accept the possibility of in the future someone or a group of interests coming to power that would now have at their disposal this degree of authority, this ability to control your life. Then you know that you have to resist it. Then you know that we, the people of the world, truly have more in common with one another than we do with any of the people that attend these WTO, WEF, G20, G7. They've all got the same interests. Get their money, get control of them. And we are all part of them. Whatever country, culture, nation, identity, traditional, orthodox, progressive, SJW, you're them. That's all they care about with their ESGs and their rhetoric and whatever flags or movements they're allying their power drive to this week. You are just something they want to control. And unless we're willing to overcome our cultural differences, unless we're willing to take responsibility for our own spiritual advancement, for our own communities, for real, true democracy now, then we are in serious trouble. And you don't need a database to know that's the truth, Ruth. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like this video, have a look at either of these two videos as well. Turn on the notification bell and subscription. We will never share that information with anyone else, although God knows what Google will do. We do these videos every day first on Rumble, and we talk in an uncensored way. Not so we can speak hatefully, but so we can speak lovingly. More important than any of this stuff is that you please stay free.